but how do I get started? How do I first sell my first products? How do I start making enough money where I feel like I can do this, where it's a reality and that I can risk the money to get started? Hey, welcome back to the Amazing Freedom Podcast. My name is Nate Slamans, joined by Andy Slamans in ABS. Today, we are talking about the beginning steps of our journey, how we were able to build cash flowing businesses that got us to the point now where we are able to invest in six-figure brands in order to start them, how we're able to do our $10 million challenge. When we hear that, oftentimes we try to go back to the beginning and remember what got us to where we're at today. And if you've been listening to the podcast, if you've been following us in our $10 million challenge, we just recently gave an update on where we're at a couple weeks ago through the first 5 months of the year, first 5-6 months, and where we're at now. But if you're watching that, you might be saying, okay, I get that, but how do I get started? How do I first sell my first products? How do I start making enough money where I feel like I can do this, where it's a reality and that I can risk the money to get started? And Andy, that's what I wanted to start with today. I know that sometimes it can look like overnight that you're able to get to the $10 million challenge, but you've been selling on Amazon for quite a while, and it's really been a journey right along the way. So let's talk about, as we get into our freedom plan and some of the key things that we look at when we're building our career path and our business. We have these principles that we try to operate from a financial principle standpoint. And one of the keys of our freedom plan is building a cash flowing business. So Andy, kick us off. How did you get started? What did this look like in the beginning when you were trying to get started on Amazon and build enough cash flow that you felt comfortable to keep selling, to go full time, and then start your own brand?
For me, I've shared this before. I was really nervous because I had never ventured off in any type of business venture before. Again, primarily, I had a mission-based mission goal for my life. I worked, early on in a church, and then worked at an organization that worked with at-risk kids. And that's all I really wanted to do. And so for me, it was very nerve-wracking. And then pile on top of that, 2 years prior to the jumping part, when I started selling on Amazon, my wife and I were like deep in financial debt, right? And so, and it was really all because of decisions that we made. It wasn't like anything that happened in the economy or anything. We just really made some dumb decisions. And so now we had climbed out of that. And then we saw like, hey, look, we're not going to be able to enter into the goals that we have when we hit 50, when we hit 60, if we continue doing what we're doing now. And so we realized we had to create, right, an additional income to reach those goals. And so as we begin to scan the horizon on the different opportunities that were out there, and I actually had some friends that were doing the same thing that I was doing, and they actually started purchasing some Subway franchises. And so they were doing the same profession we were. They realized the same thing. So they started buying some Subway franchises. And so I looked at that a little bit, but realized, man, that's a lot of work, right, for a really little gain. And then my next door neighbor was telling me that she was buying books at library sales for $10 and then selling them on Amazon for $100. So that's kind of how I first saw the model and believed like, oh my goodness, you can scale on Amazon because they do all the shipping, right? You send your product in. It's very different from eBay. So with that kind of knowledge base, and we talk a lot about this, Nate, ultimately, whatever you do, especially I think when it comes to business, you have to believe that you're in the right vehicle, right, for the goals that you want to meet. That's Warren Buffett says that a lot, right? You have to look, are you in the right vehicle? So I saw that. I said, yeah, you know what? I think Amazon's the right vehicle. So did what a lot of Amazon sellers do when they first started out, started just purchasing random stuff, sold stuff around my house. And I remember when one of my first major buys, right? And so on Amazon, I was selling what you call a lot of onesie twosie products where you just buy one thing, right? Send it in, was the Mater bubble blower mowers. So Disney movie Cars was very popular at that time. This is like 2013. Mater was one of the cars in there. Boscov's is a department store in our area. I saw that there was an arbitrage opportunity. So I could buy these things for $15 and they were selling for like $70 on Amazon. So what I did is in my Toyota Prius, I went to all of these Boscov's regionally, every single one, and I bought up all of their Mater bubble blower mower inventory, loaded up my Prius, got it back in, shipped it in Amazon. And I forget how many I sold, like 400 to 500 of these Mater bubble blower mowers. And it profited me over $4,000. That was net profit. And so I knew right then, like, hey, look, this could be a great business model. So let's go ahead and start, going all in. And month after month, this is the amazing thing, when you do decide, hey, look, I'm going to do this. And I was dedicating probably 25 to 30 hours a week in addition to my full-time job. And month over month, and I don't know if you remember this, Nate, but the revenue just kept growing. So month number 3, it was 10,000. The month number 4 was like 12,000, and just kept snowballing those things, the money right back in, looking for opportunities like the Mater bubble blower mower, right?
I wanted to ask on that. So again, all the time we talk about the next private label product or a next big opportunity when it comes to selling online. And a lot of times, people ask, how much money do you need to get started to sell on Amazon? And the answer obviously varies depending on what you're doing. And so at this stage of our selling, a lot of times we are looking at making rather large investments in our next product just because we're at the point where we can do that. So I wanted to pick your brain a little bit. If you were going back and as you look at establishing some of those arbitrage opportunities that you had and kind of hustling to get the next bubble blower mower or whatever it is, what would your mindset be over the past, couple of years? I think when we got started, it was kind of disorganized, right? You're just trying to go, you had this goal of being able to supplement your income to be able to hit a retirement goal, but it wasn't much more structured than that, probably right at that point. Was there like a certain dollar amount that you were looking to achieve on a monthly or an annual basis that you thought that was going to be the end before you thought that Amazon was going to be this full-time opportunity for you? Was there a dollar amount you were looking to get to?
At that point, I wasn't. I was trying to acquire as much profitable inventory as possible, right? And I was willing to do whatever it took. I was dumpster diving. So that's a term that probably folks here listening have heard before. I would actually jump in dumpsters behind department stores, behind outlets to see were there any merchandise, right? For whatever reason that they threw away. That is actual thing. And so you want to be able to be hungry and you can acquire that inventory at super low cost. We talk about this before. I was going to multiple thrift stores, so every day, because they get new inventory in, right? Every day from people dropping off their donations. Multiple thrift stores, you can find products, that you can purchase for $4 or $5. Again, flip on eBay or Amazon for $25 to $30. So as long as you're willing to do that, which I was, as long as you're willing to put in the time, you can find that kind of inventory. I talk about this a lot. One of my first buys was at a garage sale, and they had these films. They're called international films. Never heard of them before. They were DVDs, and so they're these rare films. Back then, that's when people were buying DVDs. This was pre-Netflix, right? These rare films that were really hard to get. And I would buy them at this garage sale for $1 or $2, and they would sell on Amazon for $50 to $60. That's the beautiful thing, right? About this business model. You don't need a lot of money to start. You can actually acquire free inventory that you can flip on eBay, if that's where you want to start, to then build up where you're purchasing inventory in multiples, like the Mater bubble blower mower, where then you can scale up on Amazon. I mean, there are literally thousands of items locally, wherever you are, if you put in the time, right, to be able to go acquire that and then spend the time listing that to begin to build that cash flow.
I mean, we've sat down basically together. And I think, over the past probably couple years, I feel like we've analyzed what are some of the main principles that we've operated on that have helped us get to the point that we're at. Not that we've arrived by any means and we're still pushing to get more, but now that we're at the point where we're doing 10 million a year, as we look back, it can seem scary. How do you get to 10 million? The same way that when we look to getting to 100 million, it's a little unknown. We're kind of taking the steps, but we can reflect back on what has helped us to get to this point. And I think we both agree that one of those key principles as part of our freedom plan that we've really been developing, as part of Amazing Freedom and together, is cash flow freedom. And we talk about this a lot. Gay Lisby talks about this a lot in the Amazon Seller Tribe. She started with the $2 cookbook and flipped that and was able to pay off her mortgage, is basically her story, right? And it sounds crazy almost, but it's a real story. She started with $2 cookbook and just kept flipping the profit. So the cash flow freedom is basically kind of what you're describing here, that you had a full-time job at the time, but you were looking to get extra income. You didn't have a lot of capital. Do you remember approximately how much money you were putting into your first Amazon business? Let's say in the first couple months, like what were you working with when it comes to capital?
Yeah, I think we started with around $2,000 in cash. That's what our start was. And now that when I say that, that included like the materials we had to buy. So we had to buy some printers. We had to buy labels, right, to print that out. And so there definitely were some capital expenditures that I would call, probably about out of that $2,000, $1,000 just went to subscriptions and kind of research and learning, as well as the tools that we needed, to kind of build, which again, at that time, it was scary. Like I remember Deanna, my wife, kind of looking at me like, "Oh man, Andy, are you going down a road where we're again gonna get into debt like we were before? You're chasing this dream. Are you sure about this?" And so, from a personal perspective, like we probably don't share that enough, but it was definitely, there's a little nervousness there. Like, is this thing going to work? We had saved up $2,000. Are we kind of flushing the $2,000 down the toilet? But with that and knowing that, I think is what kind of created the hustle that I was able to go, and spend time at the auctions, at the thrift stores. One of the first things I did was I purchased 4 of these huge book bins, from the donation, like where you can donate books. They delivered them to my house by a truck. And for the next 2 weeks, I stood in those book bins. So, you can imagine there's thousands of books in each bin. And you have to look at each book. And out of all those thousands of books, really only about 20 of them are profitable. So you're buying the book bins for pennies, but you have to go through each one. It was one of the most backbreaking experiences that I've ever had in my life. And I've done some really hard work. But out of that, I was able to, make those 4 book bins profitable. And so that's kind of right how the cash flow starts coming in.
And that's why I think it's important to talk about this. And Abs, I think I'll have you maybe ask a question in a minute about from like a third party perspective, looking in, not even being in the US, right? And seeing, over the past 10 years, what are some of the things that maybe Andy can't even remember that you would want to ask as a new seller. But I think it's important what you mentioned there, Andy, that it can be scary when you get started. And so again, when we talk about creating a brand or launching a product, there's a lot that can go into that. And what sometimes, we want to make aware is that there's a lot of steps in between there. And we really feel that creating a cash flowing business where it's not all or nothing, you can sell a couple products, maybe some work, some don't, but you kind of cut your teeth on that and you learn the process of how to sell online. I think some sellers get in trouble because they have, let's say $10,000 of capital or whatever it is, right? Say your own number, and they risk it all on like a one thing bet, because I think the human nature is kind of the get rich quick side of things, right? You don't want to do the work to get a bunch of different products out there and learn along the way. You just want to invest it all and make it big. The problem is when you don't and you've blown all your capital, that can be really demoralizing. And so, based on what you've said so far, you had a lot of little wins before you had your first big, let's call it financial win, right? You had a bunch of $100 profit wins before even your first couple thousand arbitrage. And then you had several $1,000 arbitrage wins before your first private label brand was making 10, 100,000. So I think that's what we feel like has been super important. And we maybe don't talk about enough is that we really were able to build up several cash flowing business opportunities before we were investing 6 figures into a new private label brand like we might do now, without feeling like it's, even if it went bad, it's not going to break down everything we've built up to this point. Abs, as a third party, thinking about selling on Amazon or looking at what Andy might do, any questions you can think of that you would, the burning question that you would have on how you would get your first $10,000 selling on Amazon.
Oh boy, I do have a lot. I think I've been taking a while. Andy was speaking. So Andy, walk us through the first $0 in sales and profit to the first 10K. How did that happen? How long did it take? What particular product were you selling? And when you got to that first 4K in sales, did you continue? Did you double that on the same type of product, or did you look for a new type of product? How did that first 10K happen?
Yeah, sure. One of the first things that somebody, one of my early mentors said, well, just look at the stuff around your house first. You probably have a lot of inventory around your house that you're not using that you might be able to sell. So that was one of my first go-tos. I went to my bookshelf and I had some college textbooks there that were still worth money. And so that was the first thing that I sent into Amazon. And then, previous to that, on Amazon, to become a professional seller, you have to pay $40 a month. And so again, like just looking at that subscription and saying, oh, $40 a month, you times that times 12, that was a scary first step, but I knew that I had to take it. And then I started looking for that inventory around my house. Then I started going to auctions. Online auctions are everywhere, where you can kind of see like what could potentially be profitable. And I made a few bids on some items that ended up hitting really good. Like what Nate shared, I think this is the key, and this is kind of why we were able to be successful, is we didn't go all in on one item. So you hear a lot of people talk about mutual funds. If you invest in mutual funds over long term, you're going to be successful, because those mutual funds, right, they have stock in thousands of companies. And when you're first starting out as an Amazon seller, you're learning the e-commerce Amazon ecosystem. And so it's really a great learning experience to be able to try different products, to sell some electronics, to sell some books, to sell some toys. And you're kind of figuring out, again, how to ship in, and all of your eggs aren't in one basket. And so that's definitely how we started. I was just trying to acquire as much inventory, that I possibly could at a very low price, and then just snowball those sales right back into more profitable inventory. And so like every Saturday, Abs, I was out from like 8 p.m. to 2 p.m. at garage sales. So again, in America, it's amazing. At garage sales, you can find a lot of new inventory. And so these are garage sales that people have. They purchased a product, they never used it, brand new. And so you'll get it pennies on the dollar. That's a product then that I would flip on Amazon. And so it really becomes about how can you hit these places like thrift stores, like garage sales, to again get as much low cost inventory as possible to really begin to build.
That's basically how you got to your first 10K, Andy. Obviously, 10K is a lot. How did you go from 10K to 100K? Did you, get into private label there, or you were still doing arbitrage? How did you look at your level of inventory? Did you spend all of that first 10K you made, to get inventory, or did you keep some for yourself? How did you sort of move to the next level?
Yeah. So as I was doing it, I was starting to get tired, right? Because you're buying like onesie twosies is what they call them, where you're buying one product, two product. It's a lot harder than to ship those in the boxes at Amazon. And I started to realize that if I could buy multiples, if I could buy 5 of one item, it is much easier to ship that in at scale. Now I'm going to make a little less money. However, if I'm selling 5, it's going to be more money than, again, if I'm just selling one thing. And so I realized that in order to scale up, I had to start purchasing multiples of products, right? Where I could send in 20 at a time, where I could send in 30 at a time. And so that's really when I started to see the business begin to scale up. And one of my honey holes is around here. It's a scratch and dent grocery store. And so products that are almost out of date, or products that maybe dented a little bit, I begin to see the opportunity there. And again, those were products that I could send in 150. So I tell this story. One of my first best products was Crystal Light drink mix. And so on Amazon, if you go there, there's a lot of different listings of Crystal Light. People in America, again, love their Crystal Light. And I could buy these Crystal Light drink mixes at the scratch and dent grocery store, and then, triple and quadruple the money that I was investing in it. And I could send in 500 units. Now I would have to bundle them up. So there was some time there. And so that was the real thing that I had to decide too. because when you're first starting out, it's just a ton of sweat equity, a ton of time. But I had to reduce my time that I was putting in that inventory to be able to sell a greater amount, right, of products. And so you go again from buying onesies, twosies to buying 20, 30, eventually where you can buy 300 of a product or 400, like the Mater bubble blowers that I led off the podcast with. When you send those in, then that's really when you begin to see them, you're climbing the mountain toward that 100,000.
Again, you're learning along the way. You're not making a big bet before you're able to buy, hundreds of the Mater bubble blowers. You are doing the onesies and twosies was kind of how you got started. So what would be your advice for someone starting today? Would you take the same path basically to get to that first 10,000, that first 100,000? How would that look if you really didn't have a lot of capital and maybe you're working kind of a job, but you're looking to say, hey, I know that I have college coming up in 10 years for kids, or I have retirement coming up in 20 or 30 years, kind of like the place you're at. Does that look different for you today? Or are you seeing the same path if you were to start it all over again?
If it's someone that was in my similar financial position where they had a very limited amount of capital to start out with, I would do the exact same thing. So what you're going to want to do again is you're going to want to learn Amazon, see what sells on Amazon. And then you want to start going to these locations like thrift stores, like auctions, like garage sales, and acquiring this inventory. What's amazing is Amazon makes it so easy. And then the third-party apps make it so easy because you can see instantly, right, if a product that you're looking at is selling on Amazon. I mean, really, it's in an instant that you can know and make good buying decisions on, look, is this product going to be profitable? You can see the history of it. You can see the price of it. And so with that, yeah, absolutely the same way. And just understand that it's going to be a lot of sweat equity at the start, right? You are going to have to hustle. It's going to be time. But in order to scale up, right, to get to that point where you can buy those multiples, I think it's still the best way.
I mean, we talked already about the cash flow freedom and that being an important step. What we felt like was getting our business to the point where it was producing enough profits where we felt like it was taking care of most of our needs. What was that point for you where you felt like the business was making enough money that you go full time? I think we've talked about that before, but how much were you making roughly, or how many sales were you doing where you could go full time? And what was your mindset around taking the next leap when you got to your first private label product, which in some people's mind might be like ascending a value ladder of selling online, going from your day-to-day arbitrage, which obviously you could have scaled up even further. We've talked about it in the past, why you ended up selling your own private label products. But how much were you cash flowing or earning on a monthly or annual basis where you felt like that was the point where you felt, and was it a financial secure thing? Was it just like an emotional thing? You felt like it was time? What did that look like?
I think it was a combination of things. My monthly sales at the time when I went full time were $65,000 a month is what we were selling on Amazon. And so for us personally, it was a thing like we had to say, hey, look, because I still had a full-time job, like either we had to scale down Amazon, right, because it was consuming too much of my time, or we had to make a decision to leave our full-time profession and then really begin to scale it up. And so, I don't think there's a magic number. It probably differs for everyone. But for me at that time and my free time I was able to dedicate to it, it came to a point where we had to make a jump. And so that's when we made the jump. And I think, a lot of people say, if you're in full time and you're doing a side hustle, when your full-time job starts to cost you money, because at the time I was probably making almost as much or more than in my full-time profession, that's probably the time that you need to leave whatever your full-time job is, right?
I mean, again, it's different for everybody. Probably the thing that's kept me around in a full-time job longer, and maybe someone else, is just the risk factor there, right? There's always this security where you feel like someone else is taking care of you versus being able to jump out and go on. So that's a challenge there. But I think that cash flow business helps reduce that a lot. When you see this pretty consistent amount of money being made in the business, you don't feel like you're jumping off a cliff with no parachute or whatever, right? So that to me was what helped, I know, on my end. And I feel like you kind of did that well, where for you, it was 65,000. Again, it might look different, but you were operating lean at that time too, right? So maybe, yeah, whatever you're going to say, but maybe maybe just hit on quickly the lean nature of your business versus, maybe now you operate differently because you've had time, but in the beginning it was pretty bootstrapped.
Yeah, for me, I always wanted to snowball all the profits right back into the business. That's what we did. And for me, early on, the proof of concept that helped make the decision to go full time is I saw other people who I often say were kind of average intelligence, just like I am. I always say I'm just an average, intelligence person. And I saw them selling millions of dollars a year on Amazon, flipping the same products that I was selling. They were just able to acquire more of them, right? And so for me, the belief kind of hit, look, if they can do it, I can do it too. And I think that's kind of a constant message that you and I often try to get out there is, hey, look, anyone can do this if they're willing to put in the effort and if they're willing to put in the work, because of the amazing platform that Amazon has built, allowing people like us to sell, right? And utilize all of the billions of dollars of infrastructure that they have put in and built out. And so, that's kind of, for me, also, one of the big things was, and I hope the message gets out as we, share podcasts, as we post that, folks, if you're in that position, if you want to create a side hustle, we talk about this before. I came to a realization in my 40s, in my 30s, I thought my company would take care of me for the rest of my life. I really thought that, right? I thought they cared for me. And then some different things happened. And I realized, you know what? It's a corporate machine. They don't really care for you. Ultimately, if you want to get to the goals that you want in your life, you are going to have to take control of your finances. And so that's, for me, what really pushed as well.
I have another question, but Abs, I wanted to give you an opportunity. Did you have anything else on like that beginning journey that you wanted to ask before I pick Andy on one more thing?
Yeah, I think the question I wanted to ask Andy was, so you were making about 64 or 65K a month. How much of that was profit? How much of that was just gross sales?
Yep. Yeah. So on Amazon, average, right? You're going to average probably between 18 and 22% at the end of the day. That's how much profit. So, if you're selling $100,000 a month, your net profit is probably going to be around $20,000 when it all shakes out. And so that's kind of where we were at, right at 65,000 when I went full time. And I continued as much as possible to pull as little of the profits out to use for daily, expenditures, right? And I think, as we talk about our freedom plan, that's always what we counsel, right? You want to try to live simply as much as possible. Again, the car I was driving then was a Toyota Prius. And so as I was sourcing, and back then gas prices were really low. They're not like they are now, right? But as I was sourcing that Prius, it got 50 miles to the gallon, right? Because I'm driving all around to these stores. And so that was just another benefit, right? That would put money directly into my pocket. And that's how you want to live. Like if you want to, at the end of your life, you want to live like no one else can, then now, right, when you're building, you have to operate probably like no one else does. And that's the rub, because a lot of people, they want to have those goals, right? But they're not willing to put in the work that it takes to attain those goals. And so, for 3-4 years, I was sweating, Abs, in my garage. It was ugly. Like there was stuff all over in our house. Like Deanna, at times, there was discussions. I don't like to say the word argument. I'll call them discussions, because there was inventory in our den. There was inventory in our dining room. There was inventory in our living room of our home. But I knew that in order to get to where we wanted to go, we had to go through that, right? And so, there were times I'm like, babe, I understand. I'm sorry. This is just what we have to go through, because one day, babe, I'm going to get you the house of your dreams. I know we're not in it now, and I know it looks ugly now, but one day, if you're willing to put up and help me, come aside me, right, we're going to have the house of your dreams, right? And, thankfully, as you know our story, a year ago, we were able to finally buy the house of our dreams. And, when we made the deal, we closed on a house, $1 million in cash. I said, Deanna, do you remember when we were at the old house and there was inventory all over and there was friction there between us. And I said, babe, one day I'm going to get you the house of your dreams, right? Do you remember that? Well, now you have your house of your dreams. And she started bawling, right? And so that's what you got to be willing to do is you put in that work, you put in the effort. And then I, do think because of Amazon, anybody can do it.
I can tell you're burning with more questions. Zabs, is there anything else you have? That was good. That was good to hear because it's definitely a journey. It's hard to see.
Nate, you remember when you had so much inventory in your garage, your wife could not park the car in it in wintertime in Michigan.
Well, and there's all this stuff that goes along the way. Yeah, there's the little mistakes that you try to block out almost along the way that are just part of the journey, the learning experience. I over-ordered. Actually, I had a private label product that was doing really well. And then I right when I placed a new order, I realized there was a defect essentially on the product that was already selling, but it was too late. I had already placed the order. It was already getting made. I had already wired over the money. And at that point, I can't remember how much I wired, at least 30%. And so it was coming. At first, I thought I was going to send it to Amazon. I realized that wasn't a good idea because it wasn't selling fast. So I knew I would get killed with storage fees. I had that much insight, at least, into how Amazon worked by that point. So I said, no, I can't do that. I'm going to send it to my house. And yeah, I can't, again, I blocked it. I can hardly remember the conversation when the guy was unloading it and he didn't even have a lift gate on the truck. And it's coming into my house in a subdivision. We had to break open the pallet in the truck, some pallets, and take them off one by one. It was like a disaster scenario. And I'm going up and down my driveway with individual boxes. Thankfully, I was only 23, 24. So I just made it work. And I filled up the garage and I almost didn't know if it could fit, but apparently a 20-foot container was just about enough space for my garage. And yeah, all winter, this happened in the middle of June. It was hot and they sit there all through the winter. November, December, January, February, the snow is coming down. And thankfully my wife's car had remote start. So we were able to remote start it from inside, but she was not happy that the boxes are taking up about the next June, though, a year later, we did sell it all. And the part I'm remembering now, as I say it, there was a decent amount at Amazon too, that I had to recall. So not only did we get a bunch there, but I had to recall inventory from Amazon. So the garage was already a little pretty full. And then more came from Amazon because I didn't want those Q4 storage fees hitting me, and we filled it up. So those are the bumps along the road that kind of, I guess, get you to that point. Thankfully, the reason I was able to make it through that, like if that was my only income was from that product, I probably would have been toast, right? But I had arbitrage products that I was selling. I was providing some services for sellers where I was earning money from those services, helping other sellers with, different Amazon stuff. And so I was making money in other ways. And I think that's to kind of pull this all together. If you are looking to sell on Amazon, or if you're getting started and you do have too many eggs in one basket, we feel like a core principle of our freedom plan is the cash flow freedom. And maybe you've felt like up until this point, arbitrage doesn't make sense for you. Well, if you don't know how to make that step to what you ultimately want to get to, if it's not arbitrage, I'm just telling you, Andy, you said you would do it over again. It's still arbitrage. And we work with the Amazon Seller Tribe. We talk about that all the time. And Gary and Gay have been able to help over, I think 128, I think it's up to now, sellers in the tribe that have hit the $1 million sales mark, right? And they've all done it through this cash flow method. And we know several of them who have then continued that cash flow process and then either continued to scale that up, and they're trying to get to some members of the tribe get to 10 million just with arbitrage. And that's awesome. And some members have decided to go into private label, building a brand or some type of activity that if they didn't have that cash flow business might be more risky. So just if your cash flow business right now might be your job, right? But a lot of people that are obviously looking to sell on Amazon don't want to rely on their job forever. They want to have some kind of exit plan, which is another part of our freedom plan, is the ability to exit so that you're not tied to something that you might not enjoy doing or that you feel like isn't the end all for your career. You got to look at building a cash flowing every single month, something that's paying out to you, not looking to strike rich with the big opportunity that's just going to end it all. So I think that wraps up kind of the cash flow freedom, what I'm looking at. Anything else that you have on that topic or questions, Abs?
Nope. I think that was a good wrap up of the cash flow principle.
Yeah.
I'll just end with this. This is one of my favorite phrases. The journey of 10,000 miles starts with the first step. It always starts with the first step. Like you got to step out, right?
Yeah. And we have Gary listening. He's saying, 128 sellers selling $1 million or more per year in the tribe. Incredible. Talk about proof of concept, Andy. You said that that's what helped you believe basically that you could do this at some point because you saw these other people as part of these early groups you were in who were doing it. There's no better proof of concept I've seen than the Amazon seller tribe that this works again and again and again for different sellers at any level. And I think that's what's crazy is, Andy, our stories are very, very different as far as where we started. You were, your kids were already a little bit older. You were looking at more of a retirement scenario. And maybe I can talk more about in the future where I was looking at, but I was coming from about to get married and just finished college and felt like I was needed to do a career that I went to school for the rest of my life and trying to ask myself, do I take this scary step to go into it? At the end of the day, I think the common step there was both of us started by building a cash flow business on Amazon that allowed us to have that flexibility. And, we talk a lot about freedom, and part of freedom to me is the freedom to have choices. So just not being, sometimes we have people in the tribe who love their job. And so they're selling $1 million on Amazon a year or more, and they're still working full time because they're like, hey, I just love my job. And that's awesome. But they now have this flexibility where if circumstances changed, they have that option. I don't like to get into scenarios where I don't have any options. It's just, I'm forced to do the one thing that I'm told to do basically because there is no other option. Sometimes I push back on that. Even if I was going to do it anyways, if you tell me you have to do this, I'm like, whoa, wait a second. I need my options to not do that. And that's where our freedom plan and this cash flow principle has been so important. All right. Well, thanks, Abs, for those good questions. Thanks, Andy, for sharing your journey on that first 10,000, the first 100,000, how you were able to go full time. If you are looking to do this, if you want to see the proof of concept and you want to build a cash flow business, I'll say it again, no better place than the Amazon Seller Tribe. You can go to AmazonSellerTribe.com or go to AmazingFreedom.com/insider and get our monthly magazine, our newsletter, and hear all about the tribe and how Andy's story of how he got out of debt, how he was able to buy his $1 million home in cash. All of that part of being an insider. We'll catch you guys on the next episode of the Amazing Freedom Podcast. See ya.